Before we get started, I'm going to open us in prayer. Loving God, we thank you for this night and for bringing us together and the opportunity that we have to think and talk together about the future of our congregation and where you're leading us and how you call us to serve you and to serve our neighbors. Lord, we pray that you would guide our thoughts, our conversation, and our hearts. Lord, help us not just to be people who talk, but also people who act on what you've called us and where you send us to go. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to thank you all for being here. Your mere presence is a sign of your commitment to the Lord and to this congregation, and I'm grateful. And I'm often very grateful to be part of this congregation, and because of the people here that we get to serve with. And I'm so grateful to be part of First Presbyterian Church in Ambler. And, as we're thinking about this, I just want you to know a couple things. Number one, we've said it every week in the announcement, but it's true. The genesis of this event came from our stewardship team, but it also came from a conversation that I was not part of at the annual meeting. But I heard all about it, at least a little bit. And it made me realize, we need some space for some more conversation as we envision what the future of FPC Ambler is going to be. The second thing is, I think that many times we kind of just go through and we don't think about some of the challenges that we face. And sometimes I think that we believe our challenges are unique, and they're not. One of the things that I've done in session in the last several months, I've kind of changed the structure where we spend more time talking about leadership and vision and some of the challenges that we face and how we as leaders can tackle those challenges, and less time on the business of the church. Not that the business isn't important, and we give plenty of space for that, but the real issue is that our session are called to be leaders, not just, people who make decisions about whether the youth should rent a van, because we're all going to say yes to that. So we try to just say yes to the things we're going to say yes to and take the time to discuss the things we need to discuss. But the things we discuss are things that have to do with the future of our life together and the quality of our life together. Now, one of the things that we've realized recently is that churches are facing challenges because the world is changing around us. I can tell you, this summer is the 20th anniversary of my ordination. And, it's kind of made me stop and think a little bit about what's different now than in 1999. And one of the things I've noticed that's different is that people go to church differently now than they did when I first started. When I first started, when we had regulars who came to church, which meant they did not miss church unless they were out of town or in the hospital. It was very common. Now I'll run into people out in the community who say, "Oh yeah, I go to your church all the time." And they come twice a year. And that's not uncommon that people act that way about church. That people have this different attachment. And it's partially it's because, there's all kinds of social reasons for it. There's affluence, and people are able to do different things. People travel more. Soccer and other sports have infringed on Sunday morning in a way they didn't 20 years ago. People also think about their faith differently. Many people think about it in the context of all sorts of other things, and it's not necessarily number one for many people anymore. That is the reality of the world that we live in. Another reality of the world that we live in is that we live in a market where people have sort of gotten smart about dollars that people give. One of the things that's happened in the last 20 years is that charitable organizations have become much more present in our lives. So one of the things, when you read about stewardship across the church, one of the things that you discover is that people talk about how in the past people gave the vast majority of what they give to charity to their church. Now people give it all over, and it's a much more competitive environment. That's just one of the pieces of reality that we live with. So, some of that is some of the stuff our session's been thinking about. But also, we've been thinking about what does it mean for us to live into our vision statement. Now, does anyone here know what our vision statement is, other than me and Eric and Cheryl? And you know it. I knew you knew it. Oh, that's not so there's kind of two things, right? But there's one particular vision statement that we have. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. Ready? FPC Ambler is a place where lives are changed by Christ and we live out our faith together. I think that actually the reason we changed is because that 4-1, a place where we worship, share, grow, and connect, is that to me is not so much a vision, that's more a strategy. So I think that I know that we still use those for worship, share, grow, and connect. But they're more of a strategy. This is more of like a vision, like where are we going? What kind of place do we believe the First Presbyterian Church in Ambler is called to be? And I would say, and I hope we all would say, it's a place where lives are changed by Christ and we live out our faith together. And there's really two parts of that. And part of that is that it's a place where lives are changed by Christ. That means that it should give some focus to what we do. It should give some vision to everything that we do should be about how lives are changed by Christ, where people encounter Jesus' people, God's people in the world, and we encounter the world in such a way that people's lives are changed by meeting who Jesus is and meeting Jesus' own people. And that means that sometimes we proclaim the gospel with words, and sometimes we proclaim the gospel with deeds, and sometimes we do the two things together. Bob Walters told a great story about a church, the church he grew up in, right? That's kind of transitioning to a different congregation. And what were you there for, Bob? He was there for Homecoming Sunday. And there was someone who came in, they didn't know, and the pastor was talking to someone from the church, and he said, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. That person already knows the Lord, so you don't have to worry about them. And I would hope that FPC Ambler would be a place where sometimes we see people like, you know what, that person already knows the Lord, that person already has a commitment to Jesus Christ. We don't need to be as worried about that person. And I mean, not that we don't care about everybody who comes to the doors. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like our focus is on people who don't know the Lord. That's number one. The second part of it is that we live out our faith together. Now, this is the part I think our congregation really kind of specializes in, and we think we do it well, and many times we do. If we want to, I can tell you, if Eric and I got up next Sunday and said, hey, next Saturday, there's someone in Ambler, and their house has been flooded, and they need it to be gutted, and we got to go next Saturday and do it, we'd have 20 people show up. And that's awesome. And people do it out of their commitment to the Lord and their commitment to our community. And I'm grateful for that. So we do that part, and we do it pretty naturally. I think we're probably a little less comfortable with the lives changed by Christ part, because in some ways, that's a little bit harder, because that's putting yourself out there in a way that's challenging. As we think about it, though, I want you to think about this as a circular path, where lives are changed by Christ, and we live out our faith together. And here's one of the keys in my mind, that we cannot exempt ourselves from being people who come here and have our lives changed by Christ and then live it out together. You know, the goal is not that everyone else comes and their life is changed by Christ. The goal is that you come and your life is changed by Christ, and then you go out and you live it out together. And when you live it out together, you find that your life is changed by Christ. You know, they were Swedish Baptists, and it was very much a revivalistic culture. Right, where people had like a moment when they were saved, and a moment when people had an encounter with Christ and when they came to know the Lord. And there's some power in that. But I think if someone were to ask me today, Ryan, when were you converted? I'd say, which time was I converted? Because I believe that we are converted over and over and over again. Because what happens is we go and we serve, and we find that God raises things up in us that need to change, that ought to be different, or things that are strengths that God highlights that we didn't really know about. And then God uses that to change us, and our life is changed by Christ again, and then we go out and we serve the world in Jesus' name. I believe that that's the way the Christian life works. And I hope that our statement, a place where lives are changed by Christ and we live out our faith together, is in some sense a circular statement that feeds itself. When our lives are changed by Christ, we are motivated to go out and live out our faith together. Oops, I got ahead of myself. The other part of it is living out our faith together. And that means that it's not something that we do alone. We cannot live out our faith simply by ourselves. It's not a solitary act. It's not something you do in isolation. We live out our faith in community and with each other, and we serve side by side. And there's another piece of that, which I'm going to talk about more later in the evening, but it's this: that we are all poorer if we don't all serve together. If it's just the ministry of the pastors or the staff or a few people, that is not the ministry that Christ has called us to. He has called us to ministry together, to serve together. You know, I don't know if this is true for you, but in the course of my lifetime, I've had a few sermons that I've remembered. and have had an impact on me. And one of them was when I was first installed as a pastor in June of 1999 in Norwalk, Ohio. And the senior pastor there preached this sermon, and he preached it on an odd passage. I'm going to read it to you. It's from Romans chapter 16. This is kind of the Apostle Paul's final letter, and he's writing to this church in Rome, and here's what he says. I think it's the first 16 verses. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church at Sennacherib, so that you may welcome her in the Lord as is fitting for the saints, and help her in whatever she may require from you. For she has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well. Greet Prisca and Aquila, who with me in Jesus Christ, who are with me in Christ Jesus, and who risk their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. Greet also the church in their house. Greet my beloved Epaenetus, who was the first convert in Asia for Christ. Greet Mary, who has worked very hard among you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives, who were in prison with me. They're prominent among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. Greet Ampliatus, my beloved in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our co-worker in Christ, and my beloved brother Stachys. Greet Apelles, who is approved in Christ. Greet those who belong to the family of Aristobulus. Greet my relative Herodian. Greet those in the Lord who belong to the family of Narcissus. Greet those workers in the Lord, Tryphania and Tryphosa. Greet the beloved Persis, who has worked hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and greet his mother, a mother to me also. Greet Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermes, Petrobus, Hermas, and the brothers and sisters who are with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister, Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. The churches of Christ greet you. You might wonder, what is it that's impactful about that passage? Here's what it is. When we read the Bible and we come across someone like the Apostle Paul, we often have this idea that Paul was out by himself, preaching, teaching, doing this ministry, standing on the vanguard, standing up, speaking the truth to power, all these sorts of things, and he did it alone. But the scriptures teach us again and again that he never did it alone, that he always did it with other people, and that had he done it alone, he would have utterly failed. So at the end of his life, he has this long list of people who, by one route or another, had ended up in Rome, and he writes this letter, and he says, greet all these people, say thank you to these people, and there's something else that's significant about it. It's this diverse group of people. Some of them are Hebrews, some of them are Greeks, we know from their names, some of them are women, some of them are men, some of them are rich, some of them are poor, and Paul doesn't tell us all that, but you can get some of that from the context. But it's this wide and this broad community of people, and they worked together, and together they were the ones who brought the gospel to a place like Rome and all throughout the known world at the time. I love that passage, and I love that image because it's a reminder. And when I was first ordained, it was a reminder from the senior pastor to me that ministry is not a solo but a symphony. It's something that we have to do together. And I guess to some degree as almost I don't know if it's truly confession, but I can tell you that sometimes it's easier to do it yourself. But when you do it yourself, you've done it the wrong way. Because ministry is something that we are called to do together. Ministry, church, is something that we are called to do together. You can go places I will never go. You can talk to people who will not talk to me. And I can talk to people who won't speak to you. But together, we have this incredible opportunity to be the witness for Jesus Christ here in Ambler. And my hope is that tonight, one of the visions that we get is that the ministry of our congregation is really the ministry of our congregation. Like Don said in his sermon, it's really not ours, it's Christ's congregation. It belongs to him, but he's given a piece of the ministry to each of us. I know this retired pastor, some of you know him. Doug Weiss says that for him, the key to being an effective pastor when he was a priest was when he figured out that the ministry didn't belong to him, but it belonged to everybody else. And that really is true. That the ministry of this congregation belongs to all of us together. So I have a couple little visions that I want to share with you right now. Then I'll have time for any questions you have, and then I'm going to hand it over to Eric, who's going to talk about, we had youth ministry architects come, and they talked about our youth and children's ministry, and some progress that we've made and analyzing that report, and we can answer questions about that too. So, but here are sort of these there's four kind of little snippets of what my vision is for our church. One is, I stole this from somebody else, that we would be white hot in our mission. That we would really focus what we do in our congregation on being a place where lives are changed by Christ and we live it out together. Where we're constantly saying to ourselves, is this a place where people's lives are going to be changed by Christ, or is this a place where we have an opportunity to live it out together? And I've got a secret for you. Many times when we do that and we live into that kind of a vision, it means that actually we're not doing anything different. We're just doing it in a different way. You know, you think about like a mission trip to Haiti, for example. Is that a place where lives are changed by Christ, or is that a place where we live it out together? My experience is it's both, that you live in that circle, right? Where you go to live it out together and you find that your life has been changed. I hope that everything that we do has that kind of focus, and that things that don't kind of burn away. A second thing is that we would be a place where deep connections are made. One of the things that we know about our society is that people feel disconnected. I would hope that this is a place where people with diverse opinions and diverse views of the world can come together and we can find ourselves with something deeper in common than the ordinary things that we have in common with people, and that is our faith in Jesus Christ. A third thing is that we'd be a congregation who is focused on who is not here, and that we plan for guests. I think one of the Achilles heels that many churches fall into is that we plan our life together because it suits us. The call of the gospel is that we organize our lives together so it suits people who aren't here. That we are a welcoming place with our doors open for people to come and to experience the grace and the love and the power of God here. And then the fourth thing is that our congregation is fully engaged. We can't live into these other things if we're not all on board with it. And I put the baptismal font up here and I filled it with water on purpose. I put it here because this is the place where it all starts. Our theology is not that our pastors are above us, but that our pastors are ordained and called to specific ministry of word and sacrament, to work with and among God's people, to encourage and serve beside them, because all of us have the same calling in our baptism, to be disciples and witnesses to the goodness of God. So tonight, I hope, it is a calling for all of us to live into our baptism more fully, that we would be the people that God has called us to be and enabled us by His Spirit to be. We're going to hear a little bit about the ministry. Oh, one other thing. We have this reminder every Sunday when we leave church, every time you come here and leave. Over our doors it says, remember, you are entering the mission field. I know that Bill Kemp wanted that at the last renovation, and I'm grateful that he did, because it's true. That every time we leave this place, we are going as Christ's disciples. The Apostle Paul calls us his ambassadors. We're going into the mission field so that we can live and work and represent Christ in the world through what we say and what we do and how we live. Are there any questions or thoughts before we go to our ministry architect's report? Anne. Those are my 4 things, but I'm going to share them with session on Tuesday. Yes, Scott.
I'm going to ask in terms of growth.
Yeah.
And one can read into those 4 visions that could create growth. From what I could tell from last time we were all together, that it's pretty stagnant as a membership. And I don't necessarily see it called out. I don't necessarily see it built in terms of, hey, we need to get moving, because that will generate the money and the participation and search for meaning. Everything you're talking about.
Yes. So Scott's question is about growth, and it's true. My not including growth as a goal was on purpose. And here's the reason. That I want our church to grow. Absolutely. But I think that setting growth as a goal, I don't think it's like a business in the sense like, hey, in business my goal is to grow 18%. Like that's a goal you can have in business, and it's not we don't keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak. Like there are things that we can do, like we can make on-ramps for people to get engaged in church, we can make connections for people and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think the heart of our mission is to grow. The heart of our mission is to bear witness to Jesus Christ together and to be a welcoming community that's open so that people can come and experience the presence and the grace of God. And I really believe if we do that, and if we own the mission together, then we'll grow, because places like that grow. What I've found is like, and I've done a lot of reading about like growing churches, almost none of them set goals to grow. Shrinking churches set goals to grow. Growing churches set goals to expand their mission in the world and in the community. That I think is actually the key to growing. So that's the reason I didn't put growth in there as a goal, because I think that if we live into the call of the gospel, it will happen. Yes. Yeah. Sure. So that's a good and hard question. No, that's right. Her question is, what's my vision for people who aren't here? So I'm going to back up and I'm going to weasel out of it briefly and then I'll answer it. So the way I'm going to weasel out of it is, I think from what I've just said, it's not just about what Ryan thinks. I do not want a church that's made in my image. I do not want that. We don't need that many blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 47-year-old men around. But when I think about who's not here, I think about all kinds of people who aren't here. I think that we are missing on people in our own neighborhood right here. Like within 5 blocks, we don't have many people who come to church from within 5 blocks. You're one, but there are not a lot. There are a couple. There's more than you, but there are a couple. There are not a lot. So I think one thing is focusing on our direct neighborhood. I think another thing is, like, we are not a particularly racially diverse congregation. If we were to be racially diverse, we would need to think very differently about what we're going to do and how we do it. Now, part of that is we'd have to be flexible enough to be open to that, right? The other thing is, I think that we should be a congregation that is, like, one of the things I think we've begun to do, but have not really done as fully as we'd like to, is there's a whole community of people out there who have disabilities and like kids with challenges and things like that. And my guess is that it's very hard to find a church because lots of times that kind of stuff is not tolerated. Like that kind of stuff. What I mean is the behaviors that come along with special needs children often are not tolerated very well. And I don't want us to be a place that doesn't tolerate that. I think that we should have and I really do believe we should have our doors open to anyone who comes through. Anyone who comes through, we should welcome them and allow people to become part of our church and our life together. So, but I mean, part of the whole process here, and part of what not just I'm thinking, but like it can't just be my answer. It needs to be our answer together. And I also want to tell you something else about myself. Many of you probably already know this. I don't own the church. There are things that happen here, there are things that happen in my denomination that I don't like, that I would not have chosen, but I can live with it, and I can even get behind it, because I believe that God has called me here to serve this group of people, and that serving this group of people does not mean everyone has to get on Ryan's page or you're done. I don't think that's true. I think there are things that we can disagree about faithfully and honestly and vigorously, and look, I'm not walking around thinking I'm wrong all the time, but I also don't have to be right every time either. And I have to tell you, happily, there have been many times in the church I've been proven wrong. And I've been upset about it when it happened and happy in the long run, because I don't believe I have every answer. So for me to give a full answer to that, I can't give a full answer to that, because I believe that has to emerge from our community. Yes? I think some of that also is like realizing like we sometimes fail. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. No, and thank you, Emily, for sharing that. And one of the things I want to say, like in our favor, is like when we talked about the renovation, the driving thing was like our bathrooms are failing, right? And having handicap accessible bathrooms. And I can tell you, to a person, I said, look, we don't have any handicapped accessible bathrooms. That's wrong. And you know what everybody said? That's true. We need to change that. I didn't hear anybody say, well, we should just make, like, there was no, everybody was like, that's exactly right. So I'm grateful to be part of a community where people think that way. I'm going to hand it over to Eric. You'll have more time to ask me questions.
Like Ryan, I just want to echo thanks for everybody coming out tonight. Your presence here, I think, really means a lot, just not to Ryan and I, but to the entire staff, because you play a vital part in our faith growth here. You play a vital role in our witness to Christ and to ministering to people here in Ambler and to the very ends of the earth, like we often say. About 2 summers ago, we had the ministry architects come in and do an assessment of our children's and youth ministry. And we did so because it was really important, we thought, as a leadership team, to get a outside perspective of what could children's and youth ministry look like here in Ambler. What would it look like to have a vibrant children's and youth ministry? And what would it take to get there? And part of the ministry architect's goal was to meet with everybody that would sign up for these things called listening groups. You had the opportunity to speak any concerns or to talk about what you loved and what you didn't like and everything in between. And they would come back and they would compile and they would listen to a bunch of people, from parents to students to leaders to pastors to staff members. And I think what you'll see, when you get different people with different perspectives, you're able to paint a fuller picture of what ministry could and should look like, particularly for children's and youth. And so we had them come in, and many of you were a part of those listening groups, and thank you for doing that. As a result of those listening groups, they came back with a very detailed report, recommendations that they found to be beneficial nationwide for children's and youth ministries. They pointed out some of the good things that we do, some of the strengths that we have, and they also pointed out some of our growing edges and places that we could stand to do a little bit better and have a little bit more focus on. And then they also gave us a roadmap to get there. The biggest thing, I think, for us is that we have to be unified in our mission, where lives are changed by Christ and we live out our faith together. And that goes for every ministry, from small groups to children's to youth to seniors. Everything we do has to go to that. It doesn't matter how we get there, what the path may look like, but the destination has to be where lives are changed by Christ. And so we got this report that was very detailed, very extensive back, and we, session decided we need to make a committee team to look at it, to analyze it, and then put it into practice. And that leadership team was comprised of incredible people who I'm very grateful for. Myself, Bree Reeder, Marie Thomas, Sarah McClure, Christina Brubaker, Karen Kuhlman, Lindsay Saylor, and Sean Ryan. If you see these people around, thank them for what they did and the amount of time that they invested in looking at this report and meeting together and trying to figure out where God was leading our children's and youth ministry. So we had one task like I said, to take the very detailed report from the ministry architect team, to assess the main priorities and the goals of the report as it relates to the mission and vision of the Children and Youth Ministry at FBC Ambler. Read, digest, figure out what is most important, come up with a list of things, and then to develop a plan to implement those main priorities in a timely and effective manner. Because what happens is if you do this report, if you have these consults and these consultants come in, and then you do nothing with it, what good does it do? Or if you wait too long, you've really missed the boat. So we realize we need to really act on this and act quickly and figure out what are the priorities and how do we get there. So the main priorities that the team determined of the report was that we needed to establish a mission statement for both children and youth ministry. We wrestled with should they be individualized for children's, or should they be individualized for youth? And we kept coming back to the fact that no, it needs to tie into the church mission statement where lives are changed by Christ and we live out our faith together. That's the only mission that really matters. We personalize it for the children and we personalize it for the youth, but in the grand scheme of things, all that really matters is that our children and youth know who Jesus is and they live out their faith together. The other main priorities that we realized that we needed was a cohesive Christian formation plan for children's and youth ministry, and to create clear job descriptions and expectations for volunteer positions so people know what they're asked to do and what they're signing up to do, and they're not piled on with more things. So if you sign up to be an usher or a greeter, you know exactly what your job is. Or if you sign up to serve in children's ministry for Sunday school, you know exactly what is expected of you, and you're given all the resources to see that ministry succeed. The Christian formation plan, was broken into 5 categories based on age groupings. You had nursery and preschool. Then you had lower elementaries, grade 1 through 2, upper elementary 3 through 5, middle school 6 through 8, high school 9 through 12. And within those groups, we identified what's developmentally appropriate for people in those age ranges. The big thing we want people to take away as part of our Christian formation plan is we need to figure out what they need to know, what they need to feel, and what they need to do. Everything has to fall into those realms. So we want someone in preschool to know that God made them and God loves them, and that they can talk to God. It's really simple because it's designed for someone who is in preschool. Whereas we hope and expect that when our youth leave and graduate high school, we want them to know that they were created to pursue a relationship with God, to have a passion for loving others, and that they need to demonstrate God's love to those around them. And part of that is knowing who Jesus is and having that transform your life, and then living out that faith. You'll see that it keeps coming back and again to that. The other big thing is we want to celebrate milestones. Milestones are simple events that have deep and powerful meaning that we as a church can celebrate together. Because the children and youth ministry is successful when it's integrated into the life of the church, and when the life of the church is integrated into the children and youth ministry. So when a child is baptized, that is a sacred, special, and exciting moment that we all play a role, because we all take vows to ensure that we help raise this child in the faith. Or when someone goes through Bible class in 3rd grade, they're getting their Bible. They're given an opportunity to know who Jesus is, to get into his word. And we want to celebrate and make that an exciting moment, an event for them, so that they want to go to the word and encounter God. Or in 9th grade, when they get confirmed. These are all momentous, special, and sacred moments. If they remain isolated, it's a failure. But if you, as part of the congregation and as leaders of this church, join in and celebrate those moments, you have an impact that goes far beyond anything that Ryan or I or any other leader would preach. I think it's really important for me to say this. Part of the thing that I have always loved about children's and youth ministry is my experience in them. And my experience was, I am where I am today because of the people in children's and youth ministry who poured into me. It wasn't the leaders themselves. I had great relationships with my youth directors. But it was the 6 or 7 other people that kind of mentored me in my deepest, darkest moments that helped enable me to know who Jesus was, but also to really own my faith. And so this whole ministry architect report is allowing us the opportunity to focus in on these milestones and to really focus in on the lives of our youth and our children to ensure that we have a vibrant children's and youth ministry. Scott, you asked a question about how to grow, and Ryan's right. Churches that grow or focus on growth are churches that are shrinking. But our focus is that our lives are changed by Christ, and we especially want that for our children and our youth. Because when we have our children and our youth whose lives are changed by Christ, what you'll see is people will bring their families in. And then it's a byproduct that churches will grow because of strong ministries like children's and youth. So it was really important for us to really digest this information and to act upon it in a way that encourages our children, and we have a way for us to track it. I mentioned the Christian Spiritual Formation Plan. I have 40 copies in the back, and if I need to go print more, I'll print more. But it gives you a line-by-line breakdown of what's expected. And that is really helpful for someone who might be looking to get into the children's or youth ministry. They know what's going to be happening. It may look different on a Sunday or on a Thursday, on a case-by-case basis, but this is the goal. The other thing that I mentioned were volunteer job descriptions, and it's really helpful for us to know what's expected of people, right? When you were asked to step into a role to volunteer, you need to know what's expected of you so that you can prepare, so that you can feel adequate, so that you're not caught off guard, so that you can minister fully to them. And we took it a step further, and we started creating job descriptions for every volunteer position in the church. And we're not even close to being done, because you can imagine there are a lot. On an average Sunday, it takes 65 hours of volunteerism for one Sunday. 65 hours to do ministry together and to do it well. And I think that's part of the challenge in children's and youth, and I'll extend it to positions throughout the church. We can't do it alone. Ryan and I, Cheryl, Bree, Christina and Sarah, Chris, Michael, we all need each other. And when we come in together and focus on the mission that's white hot, what you'll see is lives will be changed by Christ. We'll live out our faith together. And you'll see excitement, you'll see vibrancy, you'll see growth, you'll see all these other things. But more than anything, you'll see God glorified. And that's what matters. Do we have any questions about the Ministry Architect Report? Or children's and youth in general? All right. Oh, I got one. So explain what you mean by we have these goals. Can you flesh that out a little bit more, Elizabeth? So, yeah, that's a great way to, a great question. I think the ministry architect's report was to give it a 30,000-foot view of what our children's and youth ministry could look like. And it was our job to dissect it and to make it concrete for our children's and youth ministry. I also think that part of that is when you go through as much transition as we have, and this is by no means an excuse, but this is just a reality. We had a children's minister retire. We had Bree come on board. And so there's been a natural kind of shift and progression where we kind of allow things to ruminate and sift in our minds, but I can tell you with absolute certainty the children's ministers and Christina and Sarah and Bree have concrete ways of what it looks like, but the job of the report was more expansive. So you're talking about a cohesive curriculum. So cohesive curriculum was discussed, and it's a desire of ours. For one reason or another, it wasn't able to take place this year. Our hope is going forward that it would, but there's some caveat because some really good children's ministry curriculum is really awful for youth. And some youth curriculum is really awful for children. So it's a matter of finding what the balance is and figuring that out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. That the scope and sequence is part of this spiritual formation plan that you can see. It's out on the welcome desk. It's spelled out, very similar to what Jeannie just said. Christina, you had your hand. Yeah, that's what's out there.
If you don't mind, two quick things. Number one, Sarah and Christina, they started in December, so they jumped in trying to get a handle on this Christmas program. So they kind of jumped into the deep end, and their first month was that. So I would say, and like if you sit down and talk to them, what they'll tell you is this academic year, they've kind of been riding it out, getting through, like going with the plan that was in place. But next year, they're thinking about how we're going to really start to do this. But one of the things that Bree did is she implemented a mentorship program with the confirmation class this year. And that came out of the ministry architects. It was this need to have connections beyond. I mean, Redmond's awesome, and so is Bree, but they needed connections beyond that. So every person had a mentor that they met with, and they had a curriculum they went through to talk about things to help them get to the point of writing their faith statements. That was one step that was made in that direction, and there's going to be more conversation about kind of how to put some flesh on those bones. That's the best answer I can give you. Christina is going to share with us a little bit about finance stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do I have to turn? Oh, it's on. Okay. Great. Good evening, everyone. I think I know most of you, but if not, my name is Christina Hughes, and this is Jeff DePoit, and we are co-conveners of the Stewardship Committee. Back in November, if you recall, during Stewardship Month leading up to Pledge Sunday, we made a commitment to you that we were going to provide you with regular quarterly updates as to our financials, and then also the progress against our dream list. So the agenda right now for this section of the evening, I'm going to present a brief financial update. Then Jeff is going to come up, and hopefully everybody received this brochure on the endowment fund. If you did not, we have copies up here and there are copies in the back. Jeff is going to do a deeper dive on the endowment fund and walk you through the brochure. And then the third item on this mini section of the agenda is to go through the dream list, review that with you all, tell you what we've achieved from the first quarter, and then we do want to hear from you, and if you all have other ideas for the dream list. And then in terms of concluding the night, Ryan will come back up and has some final messages. So just to kind of give you the bookends now as we're leading toward the end of the evening. Hopefully this will... All right, so I also want to say thanks to Paul Berry and Cheryl Kerpiel, because I was prepared to present March year-to-date, but because they're so amazing, they've already closed April, and already on May 5th, we can present April year-to-date. So what I want to just draw your attention to in terms of where we are with our pledge revenue, total revenue, and expenses. So if you look at the actual column, you can see our pledge revenue was $233,619. Our total revenue was $276,665. And just to explain to you the bridge from the pledge revenue to total revenue, that also includes non-member pledges, so people who are not quote-unquote on the rolls who do give money, as well as contribution from the endowment. And then our total expenses were $284,922. So again, April year-to-date, we're running at a slight deficit. You can see there $8,257. What I do want to say, though, in terms of some of the good news or the silver lining here is if you look at the budget column, this is what we were budgeted for April year-to-date, and you can see the total line, it shows $37,278. So we were budgeting to have a larger deficit than we do. So that is good news. That said, though, we do still have a slight deficit. And again, going back to that congregational meeting that Ryan mentioned in the beginning, again, this also sort of stemmed in terms of our commitment to you all, given that dialogue, is to let you know where we are from a financial standpoint. So I'll pause. Are there any, and I'll invite Jeff to come up with me now too, before he goes into the endowment fund overview. Are there any questions about the financials? Yes, Bill. For the expenses to the budget? Great question, and Jeff and I were talking about that. I think for next quarter, Bill, and we were talking about this just before, we'll provide you more detail around that. We were sort of speculating coming in, but we raised the same. So we'll get with Paul and go through that. I don't want to speculate at this point. I do think we're doing a good job controlling our expenses, but, oh, does Bob? Okay. I don't want to put you on the spot either, Bob, but, yeah.
It could be timing related.
Yeah.
Paul has kind of cautioned us early in the year, we're still kind of early in the year, that early in the year, there's more fluctuations in both income and expenses. So it's a little hard to make accurate assessments this early in the year. But we'll be back, or we'll be communicating out in another quarter or so. The good news is we're under expenses.
Are there other questions? Okay.
All right, and if not, you can ask
Yeah,
at the
certainly
end.
you can ask us. Okay. So Jeff's going to go through endowment, and then I'll.
I'm going to leave that slide because the slide that a couple slides that are in the package don't match exactly to what I have, which is basically just to run through the brochure that we created. So part of we wanted to expand the dialogue that we've been having with everybody around our finances. So I want to give a basic overview on the endowment fund. So basically, the management of the fund is done by a team of portfolio managers, which we're allowed to have up to 7 portfolio managers per the guidelines of the endowment. Keith White's our chairman. Keith has been a chairman as long as I've served. I'm also on the endowment fund committee. I'm the session representative. The other members are Rich Krause, Dick McNeil, Tom Wynn, and Steve Lehman. We do have an open slot, which we need to talk about filling, but if you're interested or you feel like you're qualified, you can come speak to one of the members or one of the pastors. In terms of history and guidelines of the endowment fund, it's really a great story. We had an initial gift in 2003 from one family of $1.5 million. As of early April, the current balance is $2.8 million. We've been blessed, right? The markets have done well, and we've had a good team managing the endowment along the way. Since the inception of the fund, it's given back $1.9 million to the church's mission. So there's a calculation that goes along with how the endowment gives money back to the church's operating budget, and that's 5% of the last 5 quarters' average endowment balance. So that equates to approximately $125,000 per year. So the endowment fund is a very generous and a very consistent giver. We're very happy about that. When gifts are received, they're allocated as follows. 10% of the gift will go to the mission reserve, 10% will go to the session reserve, and 80% of the rest will be invested into the endowment directly. So the purpose of the endowment is twofold: to supplement permanent income, a source of investment income, and provide a long-term source of capital to fund strategic initiatives and programs. And the emphasis is really on long-term. And one of the issues I think that we can see from looking at our budget as a whole is we're a little too reliant on the endowment's income to basically plug the revenue side of our budget. I think it's around 15% currently that the endowment provides to the operating budget. So we strategically like to use some of that income that comes from the endowment for things like that are on the dream list. And we're going to talk about the dream list here shortly. In terms of general investment policies, well, just to back up, we have our endowment is at Vanguard, and we only invest in mutual funds, or ETFs. We use a balanced asset allocation. So equities can be 65% or less of the portfolio. Bonds or bond-like instruments can be 35% or less. And then short-term reserves can be 5% or less. We limit international equity to 10%. And then last year, we began to restructure the bond allocation slightly differently. We weren't getting the return on our bond funds that we thought we should be getting. So we sold some of the bond funds, and we've bought some treasury bills and CDs, which you may have noticed have started to increase to about a 2% rate. So that's kind of the general investment policies of the fund. In terms of making a gift, you can make a gift during your lifetime. You can give cash, or some people can give appreciated securities to avoid paying taxes, so it helps you and it helps the church. You can set up a trust also during your lifetime, which is a way of starting to dispose of some of your assets while you're still alive. And also in your will, you can name the endowment fund as a beneficiary. So that's a basic overview of the endowment fund. Any questions? Yep. Five. 5%. 15%, so the endowment provides, the average has been about $125,000 a year to our income on our revenue. That's about, we have a budget of about $700,000, $715,000 here. The 900, sorry.
The endowment contributes nominally 15% of our operating budget on an annualized basis. That's where that number. The drawdown is 5% of an average of the last 5 quarters, and it's like,
It's, yeah, the
Yeah.
last,
yeah, that's
Yeah.
how it's, but it's a 5% drawdown.
700,000 is our pledge budget. I knew I got the number from somewhere. Sure. Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's next steps, but the letter's definitely on the radar, and that's a great suggestion. Yeah. Yeah, from my understanding, we're tax exempt. Right. Oh. Right.
Elizabeth, we need a knowledgeable woman on the
Yeah,
board.
yeah, you're nominated.
This is a fact. I mean, actually, this is true. Like one of the things that Jeff and I have talked about, and I've talked to Keith White about as well, is we do not want to nominate another man to be on that team. We need a woman, and honestly, we need more than one. So we'd love to have someone with your knowledge, Elizabeth.
So that motion's been accepted. Yep.
So if you have more questions for Jeff, he'd be glad to answer them afterward, because
Bob
I don't want
has
to
a
keep you all
question.
night. I'm sorry, Bob. Oh, thank you.
Yep. Right. Right.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that. We can't give you the exact number tonight. But it'll probably take us a couple months to get to that point, just as we look at where we spend. But like we did save some on staff because we didn't bring on a full-time a full Southridge director until March. And we budgeted for that for the full year, but that savings was actually not that great because we were paying John Brash, not quite what we're paying Dan, but it was in the neighborhood. So there's some savings like that. And the other thing I will say is I'm grateful that people are generally very careful with dollars around here. Like people aren't just spending willy-nilly. So people are careful with the dollars that we spend. So we often underspend our budget because of things like that, because people don't look at the budget and say, well, I have $8,000 in my budget and I have $4,000 left, so I'm going to go out and buy stuff that I don't need. So there is that happens too, but we don't find that out till late in the year. Christina, we're going to talk about the dream list quickly. I'm zipping through the endowment here. So we have this dream list. Do you want me to do it or do you want to do it? Yeah.
We'll be fairly quick. All right. So as I mentioned, we've put together a dream list. We've asked for your feedback. We're going to continue to ask for your feedback. And just as a reminder of what that initial list was comprised of, could we prepare and send 10,000 meals 4 times per year, for example? I won't read through all of these. But what I am happy to announce is that from the first quarter, what we have done is there is a program called Homework Helpers, which operates out of what was the Madison Avenue Elementary School, which is behind the church. So it's back that way in that building. And it's it's supplied by the Wissahickon Athletic Club. But through a donation, we now supply snacks for the entire year for those kids who come and get tutoring help. So that is one item that we've achieved off of our dream list from the first quarter, which I'm really happy to announce. And then we have significant momentum moving forward regarding a charging station that we're looking at putting into place for electric cars in the borough. So Eric is working on that and working in conjunction with the mayor of Ambler. So I think, Ryan, probably should we say if you have additional ideas, please contact Ryan and Eric about those. I certainly will stay around after the meeting if you want to talk to me or you want to talk to Jeff for your feedback. But in the interest of time, again, want to remind you of this dream list. Know that it is iterative, it's living, we are continuing to update it, and we've just actually put a couple new items on just recently, for instance, about organizing a 5K in Ambler that would be sponsored by FPCA and with the proceeds going toward mission, for example. So please keep your ideas coming, and again, our commitment to you is we will be giving you a quarterly update on financials and dream list progress. So thank you.
So we've done this originated from stewardship. Like thinking about, we were asking, like, as we were thinking about stewardship in the fall, we were thinking like, what if we, like when you read stewardship books, right, one of the things they tell you is like, if you go to the hospital and you say, I have $1 million burning a hole in my pocket, universities are the same way, right? I have $1 million, I want to give it to you, what are you going to do with it? They say, oh, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. And one of the things that a lot of stewardship people say is they say churches don't ever have an answer to that question. What do you do? Boy, I don't know. But if someone came to me and said, hey, I have $5,000 I would like to give to the church for something, what would you do with it? Of course, I would have to go to session, but I know exactly what I'd do with it right now, is I would say we should install a system in our sanctuary where we can stream our Sunday morning worship. Because I've had multiple requests, and Barb will tell you, we have multiple requests from people who can't be in church on Sunday because of health and things like this, and they want to feel a part of it, and they could watch it live. It costs about $5,000, isn't it about $5,000? $8,000, okay. So $8,000, I underestimated, but that was one thing I would do, like, if someone was like, I have this burning a hole in my pocket, I'd say, let's do that. And we wanted to have this list, and we want you to add to it. Hey, if someone came to us with $250,000, said, we want to give you this money and spend it, we'd say, let's redo our kitchen. Like, it would be that quick. Or, Marcia, go ahead. Yes. Yes. Right. Yes. Yes. Marcia, you have asked a great question. And her question is about process and strategy. How do we set a strategy for thinking about mission in particular, local, regional, national, international, and how do we make those kinds of decisions? And I'm glad you didn't ask for a full answer, but it's a good segue to this next little thing it's kind of my last thing that I want to talk about. And I called it 6 Keys to Vibrant Ministry for the Future of FPC Ambler. I put that up there because that's the car they used in Back to the Future. But it's a little subtle. But one of the things I thought about, so Marcia, as I was thinking about this and praying about this and trying to figure out, like, what do I think are the keys for effective ministry? The thing I thought about was, I would call it working inside out. That, it needs to start locally. So, I agree with you. Like, think about youth mission. Like, we should not do mission in California at the expense of doing mission in Philadelphia. Like, that seems crazy. But sometimes we do mission far away because it kind of opens our eyes to mission nearby. Like, that happens too, that sometimes people say, oh my gosh, there are needs there. I had no idea these needs were here. If you want to see the mission field, I've been invited to go to lunch with Don Morena, and he's told me on multiple occasions he would love to give people from our church a tour of West Kensington and show you what's going on there and ways that the church can be effective in that neighborhood. So we have opportunities right here for all of us. We have opportunities in Ambler. Now, sometimes I will tell you, local mission is harder to connect with than distant mission. That's part of the issue. But I would say these keys, one of the things I thought about was inside out, and I'll explain a little bit of that. So the first key is worship that inspires and transforms. Because we can't give away what we don't have. That worship is really the heart of what church is about, because it's out of worship that we do service. Now, some people come to worship through service. It's not that it doesn't ever happen the other way, but we come to worship, and out of that we go and serve the world. That's why we have that vision or that statement above the doors, right? But the other thing about that is, like, I want you to notice another thread that runs through all these. None of these happen if we all don't work on it together, right? We all need to be pitching ideas about what we can do in worship. How can it be interactive? How can we have steps that we take out of it? A second thing is vibrant ministry to children and youth, because children and youth bring life, joy, and a future, which I think is pretty obvious. The other thing is, and I was talking to Lindsay just before this about intergenerational ministry, some of the greatest moments in our children and youth ministry were things like our Christmas program this year that was really intergenerational. And when we had this Christmas concert thing that could have been more intergenerational. And we had like Christmas crafts and stuff that's very intergenerational. You don't get that anywhere else. My kids, they see my parents who are in their 70s and Jen's parents, but they don't get to talk to people in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s. They're scared, but at church they have this opportunity, and we want that for our kids. We want our kids to grow up, and we want them also to see examples of people who've walked faithfully for a long time and see this is how it's done. A third key is opportunities for everyone to grow and deepen in faith. Because when we grow, we can share Jesus' life-changing power. We need to create opportunities for everyone. I think sometimes we think, well, we do all this children and youth stuff. We need to be conscious and intentional about doing things for people who aren't just kids, but for adults too. making sure there are plenty of opportunities for people to grow and to be stretched and to be challenged. I would say a fourth key is space to build deep relationships, because we live in an isolating society, and the church is a place to develop friendships. You know, there's nothing wrong with coming to church and finding friends here. That's a good thing. I can tell you that my best friends growing up, I met at church. I'm still friends with them. I'm not friends with people from school, but I'm still friends with my friends from church. I've made lifelong friends there. I made lifelong friends as an adult at church. It's a place where people can connect, and that's one of the things people long for. One of the things I think that is a great opportunity for us is when we have people come and visit us, we don't want to mob guests, but we want to invite them and have a path for people to go from being a guest to a friend. If we think about it that way, we need pathways for people to come and get connected in the congregation. Because the reason, like, you get to this growth question, Scott, you know why people stay at church? Because they have friends there. That's why people stay at church. They have friends. You could have all kinds of other great stuff, but if they don't have friends, they don't stay. Fifth key, mission beyond our doors that's more than money. Because Jesus sends us into the world to share the good news. This means that, I'm grateful that we give generously to mission in our community and the world, but we also need to be people who are intentionally doing mission with our hands and our feet and being out there and doing things. There are plenty of opportunities. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be a church-blessed thing. You could just find something and do it and invite people to do it with you. That's the other piece. Like, invite people to come along. Like, if you serve somewhere, if you found like a soup kitchen that you like and you serve there, call up friends from church and say, hey, I found this soup kitchen. You should come with me. You know, if you have a place where you're connected and there's meaningful ministry going on and a place to serve our neighbors, call people up and do it. And then, if you want to, you can tell us in the church office, because we're always glad to know. But just feel free to make it happen. And then the sixth key is everyone plugs in and serves as each is able, because we can't do it without everyone. You know, Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I look at our congregation, I say, yeah, the workers may be few, but we have plenty of able and willing workers here, and Jesus calls us to go and to do it. And, you know, sometimes I think we just are hesitant to step out and do what God has called us to do. Hesitant to step up because we're afraid the commitment is too much. Hesitant to step up because we don't know that we're qualified. I know this is a cliche, but it's true that God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called. That, you know, I've had so many conversations with people like, I could never lead an adult Sunday school class. I don't know the Bible well enough. I didn't ask you if you know the Bible well enough. I asked you if you're willing to sit and have a conversation with people and wrestle together. And I can tell you there are many times people ask me questions I don't know the answers to. And what you do is you wrestle and you struggle with it and you try to work it out together. Like that's what we're called to do. And like the other piece, we have the baptismal font up here. Again, I said it's on purpose. Like, part of our service is living in to the promises that we make in baptism. When we baptize children in this church and we walk them around, it's not just so that you see their cute face, it's so that you see their face and you see someone who's created and loved by God, who has been blessed and called into this congregation and put in our care as God's people to raise up children and to teach them that they are loved and they are called to go and love the world in Jesus' name. And to be honest with you, one of the things I've also learned is there is no greater privilege than serving people in Jesus' name. Many times what I find is what starts out feeling like work ends up being joyful because we're doing something for far beyond our own reasons. So those are kind of my 6 key things, and that's all I have to say to you tonight, unless you have questions for me on any topic, except Jeopardy. Yeah. If I can get backwards to it. It won't move back when it gets to the last slide, so I'll read it to you. Number 3, opportunities for everyone to grow and deepen in faith, because when we grow, we can share Jesus' life-changing power. I think it means a number of things. I think it means that we're intentional about creating opportunities for people to grow and learn. So, and we do some of this, right? Like, so we have small groups that we create so people can grow and deepen and grow together. But we can grow in that area. There are small groups, like, we would benefit from having a small group for married couples. We would benefit from that. And it would be an opportunity for some people. I think also that it means that, I don't think that anyone should age out of being part of a ministry and being fed. So therefore, and I'm grateful because we have a couple of small groups that, like, we have one that meets at Normandy Farms, which is fantastic, and that's a great opportunity. But I also think that it means that we ought not to exclude anyone from it. Like, people want to be engaged? Yes. That should be our answer. Yes. People should be able to be engaged in our ministry and learning and studying together. It also means that sometimes we have to think about it kind of sideways. Like, there are ministries that we might do that might not seem like they're, I don't know, like some things might seem more social because that's what people need. And that's what they need to grow and to deepen and to learn. I think that's perfectly legitimate and okay. I think there can be all kinds of ministries like that that grow up, and we just need to think broadly about how to include everyone in growing. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay. Other questions or thoughts? Scott? Well, this gets to your growth thing, right? I mean, some of it, like, numbers don't tell the whole story, but they tell an important story, right? So you do have to pay attention to numbers. I think also some of it, though, is subjective, that you need to talk to people and find out what's meaningful and what's important and what's powerful and what works and what doesn't work. I think that's important too. So there's kind of that objective, the numbers part, but there's the subjective part as well. I think another thing is, like, one of the things that we can track and we do know is, when people visit, how many people stay? The number is really low, just so you know. But that's a number that we track. That's a number that that's something that we would measure. I mean, there are definitely measurables, and I'm not opposed to measurables, and I think measurables are important because they tell us an important story. And they help us to think about what we can do better